They abandoned ship, a Beneteau 523, off Cape Hatteras after leaving Norfolk, but they weren't sinking. They didn't have a runaway boom with a snapped preventer or even a water leak causing the boat to take on water. Even the engine was working. So why? Now, let's preface this by saying it's easy for anyone to sit here picking apart a sailor's choices after the fact without having actually been on the boat. But I'll present you with the facts that we know. Time Ott, a 2005 Beneteau 523, is owned by a retired Austrian insurance executive, Thomas Hackspiel, who embarked from Sardinia in 2023 at age 64 to sail around the world. He planned this to take a few years. He crossed over the Western Hemisphere that year in the ARC, the Atlantic Rally for Cruisers, a rally where hundreds of sailboats cross the Atlantic together every year. Then he took a scheduled detour from the circumnavigation to go up the east coast of the US to the Chesapeake. Now, the boat has its own website asking for crew. The site says, "We are happy to take friends and sailing enthusiasts on our trip for a fair share of the expenses. However, we are not paid skippers who accept orders like in a charter company. Our route planning is therefore always based on good seamanship and the personal needs of the crew and not on a fixed timetable. You can assume average cost per week of $850 per person or $1,500 for a cabin. In American money, that's $886 a person or $1,565 a cabin per week." The Oceanis 523 is a 31,000-pound sloop with a 7-foot 7-inch fin with bulb on the bottom, and it carries 198 gallons of diesel. The 523 has a CE rating of A, certifying it for waves above 13 feet and winds up to 40 knots. She was certainly capable of some ocean travel, but there's a lot of conflict on what the weather was actually doing when the boat left Norfolk with 3 people on board. The captain and owner of Time Ott, Hackspiel's description of the weather conditions differed from what the Coast Guard had to say. In a post on his Facebook, Hackspiel says they had faced gusts of more than 60 knots and seas greater than 23 feet, and at the time that they called for help, they were running out of diesel. Now, they were rescued 150 miles off Hatteras, so to be running out of diesel, they would have had to have been motoring hard the whole way. But there was lots of wind, so that kind of seems weird. And according to the Coast Guard, they were experiencing up to 20-knot winds with 10-foot seas. Actually, the forecast for what the captain was claiming, the 60 knots with 23-foot seas, was from the day before they actually left Norfolk. Now, when it comes to Atlantic weather, there is no greater voice in the sailboat cruising community than that of Chris Parker. Chris has been weather routing sailors for more than 20 years, and if you've done any Atlantic travel at all, you know who Chris Parker is. And the day they actually left, he said that by the time the Coast Guard helicopter arrived on scene, the weather was improving markedly, and Time Ott would have been able to sail all the way to the Bahamas on a broad reach at that point. According to Parker, Time Ott's crew was hauled onto the Coast Guard helicopter about 12 hours after the cold front had passed. Tad Roberts, a Canadian naval architect, said capsizing on that boat seems unlikely in the stated conditions, but of course we weren't there. Cape Hatteras in December is too late in the year. Big, fat, snap-rolling boat like she was, with short crew, the one experienced person gets exhausted after 4 days and they give up. Of course, as Roberts noted, we weren't aboard that 53-footer to feel their pain, but skeptics also had a point. Max 10-foot seas make for a bumpy ride, but are well within the boat's ocean rating. Chris Parker goes on to say, "The video taken from the vessel with a man at the helm steering shows the boom centered. I can't determine when the video was taken nor whether the vessel was sailing or motoring, but there was ample wind for sailing in the video. And there has been ample wind for sailing since the vessel exited the Gulf Stream early on Tuesday, December 10th, according to vessel tracking info on marinetraffic.com. If the vessel was low on fuel, and assuming they departed Chesapeake Bay presumably late Sunday the 8th with full fuel, and there was no leak, then it seems reasonable to conclude that the vessel spent considerable time motoring or motor sailing too much into the brisk south by southwest winds from Tuesday the 10th through Wednesday the 11th evening. Maintaining a heading too close to the wind in those conditions could easily have exhausted the crew, Chris says, and could have contributed to any gear failures which might have occurred. Chris says their recommendation to the vessel would have been to not depart with a forecast for strong headwinds. And if the vessel did depart anyway, then encountered the strong headwinds, we would have advised to only sail as close to a reach as you can without sacrificing too much speed or comfort, and definitely not sailing or motor sailing too close to the wind for the conditions. If the vessel had been in contact with any other weather router, the vessel should have known what to expect ahead of the cold front, and they should have known that as soon as the cold front passed, the remainder of their trip would be in good but brisk sailing conditions on a broad reach to downwind. They abandoned ship about 12 hours after the cold front passed and after conditions had subsided very significantly. I can only conclude that conditions were so bad on board due to at least a few imprudent decisions that the crew opted to abandon ship even after the weather event had passed. So the call comes in, mayday. The Coast Guard report says at 3 p.m. on Wednesday, Coast Guard Sector Charleston notified watchstanders at the 5th Coast Guard District Command Center that the sailing vessel Timeout was caught in heavy weather and at risk of capsizing. That was what the call was. The mariners aboard the vessel initially stated that they were not in distress. However, early Thursday morning, the mariners aboard Timeout requested to abandon their vessel, prompting watchstanders to direct the launch of an AC-130 Hercules and an MH-60 Jayhawk crew from Coast Guard Air Station Elizabeth City and the Coast Guard cutter Richard Snyder. The Hercules and Jayhawk crew arrived on scene at 9:30 a.m., with the Jayhawk crew successfully hoisting all 3 mariners from their vessel at 10 a.m. with no injuries reported. Kudos to the Coast Guard crew. The vessel was equipped with life jackets, life raft, an emergency position indicating radio beacon, EPIRB, and Starlink communications. The weather on scene was reported at 17 to 23 mile-an-hour winds with seas of 6 to 10 feet at the time of the rescue. Timeout was left adrift in the Atlantic. Now, by all accounts, it seems like they left too early in a weather forecast, beat into it for 48 hours and got worn out. We don't know if the other 2 men on board were just friends, paid crew, or even experienced sailors at all. All of them just seem to have given up, called for mayday, and waited for help. I followed this story in real time when it happened, and I wondered at the time, why leave the boat? You could heave to or go bare pole and motor, or as Chris Parker points out, given the weather at the time, go beam reach and straight down to the Bahamas. But of course, we weren't there. The Coast Guard does point out that they had an EPIRB, satellite communication, and a life raft, even Starlink, so they probably had internet. So everything was in place. It seems that a few bad decisions and maybe a little bit of a rush to get moving played a big role in this. We often think about our boat's ability and compare it to the weather forecast. Can my boat handle these waves? Can she handle the wind plus a margin for forecasting error? But we don't often think about what we can handle, the humans making the boat work. We might see a forecast our boat can easily make use of and jump on the weather window, not realizing it might mean 48 or more hours of solid sailing that our bodies may just not be able to do. And then we also have to assume, what if the autopilot stops working? Because it will. It always does right when you need it most. What do you all think? Hatteras in December? Was it too much for the crew? If you have a good sailing story to tell and want to do that on video, let me know at comments@practical-sailor.com. Also, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel here. I'll see you guys next time.